Picture this. It's July 20th, 1969, and 650 million people around the world are glued to their television screens, watching grainy black and white footage of what's supposedly happening 240,000 miles away on the moon. Neil Armstrong's voice crackles through the static. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. But what if I told you that some people believe this historic moment, humanity's greatest achievement, never actually happened? What if the moon landing was nothing more than an elaborate hoax, filmed on a soundstage somewhere on Earth? Today, we're diving deep into one of the most persistent conspiracy theories of the modern age, the moon landing hoax theory. We'll examine the claims, analyze the evidence, and explore why, more than 50 years later, millions of people still question whether we ever set foot on the lunar surface. I'm your host, and this is going to be a journey that challenges everything you think you know about space exploration. But first, let me ask you something. Have you ever looked at those Apollo mission photos and noticed something that just seemed ... off? Maybe the shadows didn't look quite right, or you wondered why you couldn't see any stars in the lunar sky. Well, you're not alone. These observations have fueled decades of debate and investigation. So buckle up, because we're about to explore one of history's most controversial topics. And I guarantee you'll see the moon landing in a completely different light by the end of this video. Before we dive into the conspiracy theories, let's set the stage by understanding what officially happened during the Apollo missions. The space race between the United States and Soviet Union was in full swing during the 1960s. President John F. Kennedy had made his bold declaration in 1961. America would land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the decade was out. The pressure was immense. The Cold War was at its peak, and national pride was on the line. NASA's Apollo program represented the culmination of years of technological advancement, employing over 400,000 people and costing $25 billion. That's about $150 billion in today's money. Apollo 11 launched on July 16, 1969, carrying 3 astronauts: Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. 4 days later, Armstrong and Aldrin descended to the moon's surface in the lunar module, while Collins remained in orbit. They spent 21 hours on the moon, collected samples, conducted experiments, and planted an American flag. The mission was broadcast live to television audiences worldwide, and the astronauts returned safely to Earth on July 24th. It was, by all accounts, humanity's greatest technological achievement. But almost immediately, questions began to emerge. The first prominent voice to question the moon landing was Bill Kaysing, a former Rocketdyne employee who published a book in 1976 called "We Never Went to the Moon: America's $30 billion Swindle." Kaysing argued that the technology didn't exist in 1969 to safely land humans on the moon and return them to Earth. He claimed the entire mission was filmed on a movie set, possibly at Area 51 in Nevada. Kaysing's book became the foundation for what would grow into a global movement of moon landing skeptics. But what exactly are these conspiracy theorists claiming? Let's break down their main arguments. The first and perhaps most famous claim involves the photographs taken during the mission. Conspiracy theorists point to what they call anomalous shadows in the lunar photographs. They argue that if the sun was the only source of light on the moon, all shadows should be parallel and point in the same direction. However, many Apollo photos show shadows that appear to be pointing in different directions, suggesting multiple light sources. According to skeptics, this proves the photos were taken on a film set with multiple studio lights. Another photographic anomaly they point to is the absence of stars in the lunar sky. In every single photograph taken on the moon's surface, the sky appears completely black, no stars are visible. Conspiracy theorists argue that this is impossible, since there's no atmosphere on the moon to obscure starlight. They claim this proves the photos were taken on a soundstage against a black backdrop. Then there's the famous flag controversy. In the footage and photographs, the American flag appears to be waving in what looks like a breeze. But there's no atmosphere on the moon, so there can't be any wind. Skeptics argue this is clear evidence that the flag footage was shot on Earth, possibly with fans creating artificial wind effects. Another argument involves the lunar module itself. Conspiracy theorists claim that when the lunar module took off from the moon's surface, there should have been a visible blast crater beneath it from the rocket engine. However, in the photographs, the ground beneath the module appears relatively undisturbed. They argue this proves the landing was staged, as a real rocket would have created significant surface damage. Some skeptics also question the radiation exposure that astronauts would have faced during the journey. The Van Allen radiation belts surround Earth, and conspiracy theorists claim that passing through these belts would have been lethal to the astronauts. They argue that NASA had no way to protect the crew from this deadly radiation in 1969. There are also technical arguments about the spacecraft itself. Some conspiracy theorists claim that the lunar module looked too flimsy to survive a landing on the moon. With its thin aluminum skin and seemingly fragile construction, they argue it couldn't have functioned in the harsh lunar environment. Another claim involves the quality of the television broadcast from the moon. Given the technological limitations of 1969, skeptics question how NASA was able to transmit clear television signals across 240,000 miles of space. They argue that the communication technology simply didn't exist at the time. Some conspiracy theorists also point to what they call impossible physics in the lunar footage. They analyze the way dust behaves when kicked up by the astronauts' boots, claiming it doesn't match what should happen in the moon's low-gravity environment. Finally, there's the argument about motive. Conspiracy theorists claim that the United States was so desperate to win the space race against the Soviet Union that they were willing to fake the moon landing. With the Cold War at its peak and national pride at stake, the pressure to succeed was enormous. They argue that faking the landing was easier and less risky than actually attempting it. These are the main arguments that fuel the moon landing hoax conspiracy theory. But before we accept or dismiss these claims, we need to examine them critically and look at the scientific explanations. So let's dive into what NASA and the scientific community have to say about each of these allegations. Starting with the shadow controversy. This is perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of the lunar photography. The key to understanding lunar shadows lies in the moon's unique lighting conditions and topography. While the sun is indeed the primary light source, the moon's surface itself acts as a secondary light source through reflection. The lunar regolith, the powdery surface material, reflects sunlight in all directions, creating what photographers call fill lighting. This means that while shadows exist, they're not completely black as they would be without any reflected light. Additionally, the moon's surface isn't perfectly flat. Small hills, craters, and undulations in the terrain can cause shadows to appear to point in different directions. When you factor in the perspective of the camera and the three-dimensional nature of the landscape, the shadow directions in Apollo photos make perfect sense. Photography experts have recreated these lighting conditions on Earth and produced identical shadow effects. Now, what about the missing stars? This is actually a simple matter of photography and exposure settings. The moon's surface is extremely bright, when lit by direct sunlight, much brighter than Earth's surface under similar conditions. To properly expose the lunar surface and the astronauts, the cameras had to use very fast shutter speeds and small apertures. These settings, while perfect for capturing the brightly lit surface, make it impossible to capture the relatively dim light from distant stars. It's the same reason you can't see stars in photographs taken during the day on Earth. The bright foreground completely overwhelms the faint background stars. If NASA had faked the photos, they probably would have included stars to make them look more realistic. The absence of stars actually supports the authenticity of the photographs. The flag controversy has an equally straightforward explanation. The American flag wasn't actually waving in the wind. NASA knew there was no atmosphere on the moon, so they designed the flag with a horizontal rod along the top to keep it extended. What appears to be waving is actually wrinkles and folds in the fabric that were created when the flag was unfurled. These wrinkles remained static throughout the mission. They never actually moved like they would in a breeze. If you watch the video carefully, you'll notice the flag only moves when the astronauts are directly manipulating the flagpole. The moment they let go, it becomes completely still. This behavior is exactly what you'd expect in a vacuum environment. As for the missing blast crater under the lunar module, this argument shows a misunderstanding of rocket physics and lunar conditions. The lunar module's descent engine throttled down significantly as it approached the surface. By the time it landed, the engine was only producing about 3,000 pounds of thrust. This thrust was spread out over a relatively large area and lasted only briefly. The moon's surface consists of a thin layer of dust over solid bedrock. While the engine did blow away some surface dust, it wasn't powerful enough or concentrated enough to create a large crater. You can actually see in the photographs that the surface dust was disturbed in a radial pattern around the landing site. The radiation argument is more complex, but equally flawed. Yes, the Van Allen radiation belts do pose a hazard to spacecraft, but the exposure depends on how long you spend in them. The Apollo spacecraft passed through the radiation belts very quickly, limiting the astronauts' exposure to safe levels. NASA conducted extensive radiation testing and shielding calculations before the missions. The spacecraft's aluminum hull and the trajectory chosen for the flight path minimized radiation exposure. While the astronauts did receive more radiation than they would on Earth, it was well within acceptable limits for short-duration missions. The lunar module's apparently flimsy construction actually represents brilliant engineering for its specific purpose. Since it only had to operate in the vacuum of space and the moon's low gravity, it didn't need the thick hull required for atmospheric flight. The thin aluminum skin was sufficient for the pressure differential and provided adequate protection from micrometeorites. Every gram of weight was critical for the mission, so engineers designed the lightest possible structure that could still do the job. The lunar module's design was tested extensively in vacuum chambers on Earth. Regarding the television transmission quality, it's important to remember that the moon broadcast wasn't actually high quality by today's standards. The images were grainy, low resolution, and often difficult to make out. The technology for transmitting basic television signals across space did exist in 1969. NASA used high-gain directional antennas and powerful transmitters to send the signal back to Earth. The receiving stations on Earth used massive dish antennas to capture and amplify the weak signals. The dust behavior in the lunar footage actually provides some of the strongest evidence that the missions were real. In the moon's vacuum environment with low gravity, dust behaves very differently than it does on Earth. When kicked up by the astronauts' boots, the dust particles follow perfect parabolic trajectories without air resistance. On Earth, Air resistance would cause the dust to billow and hang in the air. This effect would have been impossible to fake with 1969 technology. The motivation argument that the US was desperate to win the space race, actually, works against the conspiracy theory. If the landing had been faked, the Soviet Union would have been the first to expose it. The Soviets were tracking the Apollo missions with their own equipment and confirmed that the spacecraft did indeed travel to the moon. Soviet space officials publicly acknowledged the success of Apollo 11. It would have been propaganda gold for them to expose an American hoax, but they never did because they knew it was real. Now let's look at some of the broader evidence that supports the authenticity of the moon landings. First, there's the sheer scale of the Apollo program. Over 400,000 people worked on the project across multiple companies and government agencies. Keeping a hoax of this magnitude secret would require the silence of hundreds of thousands of people for over 50 years. In an age where government secrets regularly leak to the press, it's virtually impossible that such a massive conspiracy could remain hidden. There were 6 successful moon landings between 1969 and 1972, not just Apollo 11. Each mission brought back unique rock samples from different lunar locations. These samples have been studied by scientists around the world for decades. The rocks show clear signs of formation in the moon's low-gravity, airless environment. They contain isotope ratios that are impossible to replicate on Earth and show signs of bombardment by cosmic radiation over millions of years. Independent verification comes from multiple sources. Countries around the world, including the Soviet Union, tracked the Apollo missions with their own radar and radio equipment. Ham radio operators picked up transmissions from the spacecraft. The Japanese Selenological and Engineering Explorer, Selene, mission photograph Apollo landing sites in 2008. NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter has captured detailed images of all 6 Apollo landing sites showing the lunar modules, equipment, and even footpaths left by the astronauts. The technology argument also falls apart under scrutiny. While the Apollo program was certainly at the cutting edge of 1960s technology, every component was based on existing scientific principles. The Saturn V rocket, while massive, used conventional chemical propulsion. The guidance computers, while primitive by today's standards, were sufficient for the Yanids. Relatively simple calculations required. Many of the technologies developed for Apollo found their way into everyday applications. Perhaps most importantly, we have retroreflectors, special mirrors placed on the moon by Apollo astronauts. Scientists have been bouncing laser beams off these mirrors for over 50 years to measure the exact distance between Earth and the moon. These experiments continue today and provide ongoing proof that humans visited the moon. So if the evidence overwhelmingly supports the reality of the moon landings, why do conspiracy theories persist? The psychology behind conspiracy theories is complex and fascinating. Part of it stems from a natural human tendency to question authority and seek alternative explanations for major events. The moon landing was such an extraordinary achievement that it can be difficult to believe it actually happened. Some people find it easier to believe in a grand conspiracy than to accept that humans accomplished something so remarkable. There's also a psychological phenomenon called the availability heuristic. People tend to believe information that's easily accessible or frequently repeated. If someone encounters moon landing conspiracy theories more often than scientific explanations, they might start to view them as more credible. The Dunning-Kruger effect also plays a role. This cognitive bias causes people with limited knowledge in a subject to overestimate their own understanding. Someone might look at a moon landing photograph and think they've spotted an obvious flaw that thousands of experts somehow missed. Confirmation bias is another factor. Once someone starts to doubt the moon landings, they tend to seek out information that confirms their suspicions while ignoring evidence to the contrary. This creates an echo chamber where conspiracy theories seem more believable. The internet has amplified these effects by making it easier for like-minded skeptics to find each other and share their theories. Social media algorithms can create filter bubbles where conspiracy theories seem mainstream and widely accepted. There's also a sense of special knowledge or enlightenment that comes with believing in conspiracy theories. It can make people feel like they're part of an elite group that sees through the lies everyone else believes. This can be psychologically rewarding, especially for people who feel powerless or overlooked in other areas of their lives. Distrust of government and institutions also fuels conspiracy theories. The Apollo missions coincided with the Vietnam War and Watergate scandal, events that shook public trust in the U.S. government. If the government could lie about Vietnam or engage in the Watergate cover-up, why not lie about the moon landings? It's worth examining how moon landing conspiracy theories have evolved over the decades. Bill Kaysing's original claims in the 1970s were relatively simple. The technology didn't exist, and the pressure to beat the Soviets was too great. Over time, the theories have become more elaborate and specific. Modern conspiracy theorists have had 50 years to analyze every photograph, every piece of footage, and every detail of the missions. They've created increasingly complex explanations for every piece of evidence that contradicts their beliefs. This process, called ad hoc reasoning, involves constantly modifying a theory to explain away contradictory evidence rather than abandoning the theory. For example, when scientists point to the laser retroreflectors on the moon as proof of human presence, some conspiracy theorists claim these could have been placed by unmanned Soviet missions. When high-resolution images from lunar orbit show Apollo equipment on the surface, skeptics claim these images could be faked. This pattern of constantly moving goalposts makes conspiracy theories nearly impossible to debunk completely. The cultural impact of moon landing conspiracy theories extends far beyond space exploration. They've become a template for questioning other major events and scientific consensus. The same type of reasoning used to debunk the moon landings appears in theories about 9/11's climate change and vaccines. This highlights the importance of critical thinking and scientific literacy in evaluating extraordinary claims. Hollywood has both helped and hindered public understanding of the moon landings. Movies like Capricorn 1, 1978, depicted a fake Mars mission, planting the idea that government space agencies might stage planetary landings. More recently, films like First Man and Apollo 13 have portrayed the technical challenges and human drama of the real missions. The way these stories are told in popular culture influences how people perceive the historical events. Educational institutions also play a crucial role in how moon landing conspiracy theories spread. When science education fails to adequately explain the principles behind space travel, people are more susceptible to alternative explanations. Understanding basic physics, photography, and the scientific method provides important tools for evaluating conspiracy claims. Let's take a moment to consider what it would have taken to actually fake the moon landings. The conspiracy would have required not just NASA, but also the cooperation of the Soviet Union, multiple other countries' space agencies, thousands of scientists, journalists, and amateur radio operators. The technology to fake the lunar footage convincingly didn't exist in 1969. The slow-motion effects needed to simulate lunar gravity, the vacuum behavior of dust, and the lighting effects would have been impossible to create with 1960s filmmaking techniques. Stanley Kubrick, often mentioned as the director who could have faked the landings, didn't have access to the technology needed to create such convincing effects. 2001, A Space Odyssey, released in 1968, used wires and other visible techniques that look crude compared to the Apollo footage. The cost of maintaining such a massive conspiracy over 50-plus years would likely exceed the cost of actually going to the moon. It's also worth noting that several supposed deathbed confessions and whistleblower testimonies claiming to expose the hoax have been thoroughly debunked. These often involve people who had minimal or no connection to the actual Apollo program, making claims that contradict established facts. The international space community has grown tremendously since 1969. China, India, Japan, and the European Space Agency have all sent successful missions to the moon. These independent missions have confirmed details about the lunar environment that match perfectly with the Apollo findings. If the Apollo data had been fabricated, these later missions would have exposed the deception. Modern computer simulations can recreate the exact lighting and gravitational conditions on the moon. When scientists input the known parameters of the lunar environment, they can perfectly reproduce the anomalous effects that conspiracy theorists point to as evidence of fakery. The scientific method requires that extraordinary claims be supported by extraordinary evidence. Moon landing conspiracy theories make extraordinary claims, but provide no credible evidence to support them. Instead, they rely on misinterpretation of existing evidence and arguments from incredulity. One interesting aspect of moon landing conspiracy theories is how they've been used by foreign governments for propaganda purposes. Some countries have promoted these theories as a way to diminish American achievements and question Western technological superiority. This political dimension adds another layer to why these theories persist and spread. The rise of social media has fundamentally changed how conspiracy theories spread. YouTube videos, Facebook groups, and Twitter threads can make professional-looking presentations of conspiracy claims. The algorithms that power these platforms often promote sensational content, giving conspiracy theories wider reach than factual rebuttals. Content creators sometimes promote conspiracy theories not because they believe them, but because they generate views and ad revenue. This economic incentive can perpetuate misinformation even when the creators know better. Fighting misinformation requires understanding both the technical facts and the psychological and social factors that make people susceptible to false beliefs. Education is crucial, but it's not enough to simply present facts. Effective debunking requires understanding the emotional and psychological needs that conspiracy theories fulfill. People need to feel heard and respected, even when their beliefs are scientifically incorrect. Attacking someone's intelligence or character for believing in conspiracy theories often backfires and makes them more entrenched in their beliefs. Instead, patient explanation of the evidence, acknowledgement of legitimate concerns, and demonstration of respect for the person can be more effective. It's also important to understand that some skepticism is healthy and natural. Questioning authority and asking for evidence are important parts of scientific thinking. The problem arises when skepticism becomes selective, when people demand extraordinary evidence for mainstream claims, but accept extraordinary claims without evidence. Let's examine some specific pieces of evidence that conspiracy theorists often overlook or dismiss. The Apollo missions brought back 842 pounds of moon rocks and soil samples. These samples have been studied by scientists from around the world for over 50 years. The rocks show clear evidence of formation in the moon's unique environment. No water, no atmosphere, different gravitational conditions, and constant bombardment by cosmic radiation. Some of the minerals found in lunar samples don't exist naturally on Earth and can only form in the moon's specific conditions. The isotope ratios in lunar samples are different from Earth rocks in ways that confirm the Moon's origin and evolution. Tiny glass spheres formed by micrometeorite impacts are embedded throughout the two samples, evidence of the Moon's airless environment. Independent laboratories worldwide have confirmed these findings using different analytical techniques. The consistency of the data across hundreds of different samples from 6 different landing sites makes fabrication essentially impossible. Another compelling piece of evidence is the real-time communications between mission control and the astronauts. Hours of audio recordings capture conversations that would have been impossible to script in advance. The astronauts respond to unexpected situations, make spontaneous observations, and display genuine human reactions to their extraordinary experience. The technical discussions about spacecraft systems, navigation, and procedures demonstrate deep knowledge of spaceflight that couldn't have been faked by actors. Radio triangulation by multiple tracking stations around the world confirmed that the transmissions were coming from the direction of the Moon. The Doppler shift in the radio signals matched exactly what would be expected from a spacecraft traveling to and from the Moon. The timing delays in communications, about 1.3 seconds each way when the Moon is at its closest, exactly match the speed of light over that distance. These technical details would have been nearly impossible to fake with 1960s technology. The video footage from the Moon shows numerous effects that would have been impossible to create on Earth in 1969. The way dust behaves when disturbed by the lunar rover's wheels follows perfect parabolic trajectories without air resistance. The astronauts' movements show the effects of the Moon's lower gravity, about 1/6 that of Earth. Slow motion filming on Earth couldn't replicate these effects convincingly because the timing would be wrong for both gravity and inertia. The harsh lighting conditions on the Moon, with bright sunlit areas and deep shadows, are accurately captured in the footage. The lack of atmospheric scattering creates an unusual visual environment that matches theoretical predictions perfectly. Equipment left on the Moon continues to provide evidence of human presence. The Passive Seismic Experiment Package, PSEP, left by Apollo 11 transmitted data back to Earth for 3 weeks after the astronauts departed. Later Apollo missions left more sophisticated seismometers that operated for years, detecting moonquakes and meteorite impacts. The Lunar Laser Ranging Experiment uses mirrors placed by Apollo 11, 14, and 15 crews. These retroreflectors are still used today by observatories around the world to measure the Moon's distance with millimeter precision. The data from these experiments has revealed that the Moon is gradually moving away from Earth at about 3.8 centimeters per year. This ongoing scientific program provides continuous confirmation of human presence on the Moon. Recent lunar missions by other countries have photographed the Apollo landing sites from orbit. Japan's Selene mission, India's Chandrayaan-1, China's Chang'e missions, and NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter have all captured images of Apollo equipment on the lunar surface. These images show the lunar modules, scientific instruments, and even the paths walked by astronauts. The shadows cast by this equipment match the lighting conditions expected for the Moon's environment. Some of this equipment has been photographed by multiple missions over several years, showing it remains exactly where the Apollo crews left it. The international cooperation required to maintain a hoax involving all these space agencies would be unprecedented and practically impossible. The technological capabilities demonstrated by Apollo align perfectly with the broader context of 1960s achievements. The same period saw the development of intercontinental ballistic missiles, satellite communications, and early computer networks. The Apollo program was ambitious, but represented a logical extension of existing technologies rather than impossible leaps. The Saturn V rocket, while enormous, used well-understood rocket principles scaled up to unprecedented size. The command and service modules used heat shield technology that had been tested on earlier missions. The lunar module used rockets and life support systems based on proven designs. Even the spacesuits, while sophisticated, were engineered using materials and techniques available in the 1960s. What made Apollo remarkable wasn't the invention of entirely new physics, but the successful integration of many complex systems. The human factors also argue against a hoax. The 12 astronauts who walked on the moon have remained consistent in their accounts for over 50 years. They've given thousands of interviews, written books, and spoken to countless audiences. Their descriptions of the lunar experience are detailed, consistent, and filled with genuine emotion and wonder. These men were military test pilots, highly trained, disciplined individuals unlikely to participate in a massive deception. Many of them have spoken about the profound impact the experience had on their worldview and spiritual beliefs. The psychological profiles of these astronauts show individuals committed to honesty and scientific integrity. Michael Collins, who remained in orbit during Apollo 11, has been particularly eloquent about the experience and the view of Earth from space. His descriptions of the pale blue dot and the fragility of our planet have inspired environmental movements and space advocacy. It's worth considering the broader implications if the moon landings were faked. Such a deception would mean that thousands of NASA employees, contractors, and international partners were complicit in lying to the world for over 50 years. It would mean that multiple U.S. presidents from both political parties maintained this lie across decades of changing administrations. It would require the cooperation of America's biggest rivals, including the Soviet Union, in maintaining the deception. The scale of such a conspiracy would be unprecedented in human history. Yet despite intensive scrutiny from journalists, historians, and foreign governments, no credible evidence of such a conspiracy has ever emerged. The technological legacy of Apollo provides additional confirmation of its authenticity. Technologies developed for the moon missions found applications in everything from computer miniaturization to materials science. The integrated circuit industry received a major boost from NASA's need for lightweight, reliable electronics. Advanced materials like Teflon, Velcro, and memory foam, while not invented for Apollo, were refined and popularized through the space program. The project management techniques developed for Apollo influenced industries from software development to construction. This technological spillover effect demonstrates that real engineering work was being done, not just elaborate theater. Looking at the current state of lunar exploration provides interesting context for the moon landing debate. NASA's Artemis program aims to return humans to the moon by the mid-2020s, yet it's facing significant technical and financial challenges. If landing on the moon were easy enough to fake in 1969, why is it proving so difficult to do again with modern technology? The answer lies in the massive investment and focused effort that Apollo required. At its peak, NASA consumed over 4% of the federal budget, a level of funding that hasn't been matched since. The Apollo program employed the equivalent of an entire major industry focused solely on reaching the moon. Today's space program operates with much smaller budgets and must balance many different priorities. The knowledge and infrastructure built up during Apollo was gradually dismantled after the program ended in 1972. Many of the engineers and technicians who made Apollo possible have retired or passed away, taking their expertise with them. This explains why returning to the moon is challenging even with better technology. We're essentially starting over in many ways. The persistence of moon landing conspiracy theories also reflects broader changes in how information spreads in modern society. In 1969, most people got their news from a limited number of trusted sources: major newspapers, television networks, and radio stations. These outlets, despite their flaws, generally employed professional journalists who followed established standards for verifying information. Today's information landscape is much more fragmented and democratized. Anyone can create content that looks professional and authoritative, regardless of their qualifications or commitment to accuracy. Social media algorithms prioritize engagement over truth, often promoting sensational or controversial content. This creates an environment where conspiracy theories can spread faster than factual corrections. The solution isn't to return to the old gatekeeping model, but to develop better critical thinking skills for navigating the modern information environment. This includes understanding how to evaluate sources, recognizing common logical fallacies, and distinguishing between correlation and causation. It also means being comfortable with uncertainty and complexity rather than seeking simple explanations for complicated events. The moon landing conspiracy theory serves as an important case study in how to approach extraordinary claims. The key is to examine the quality and quantity of evidence on all sides, consider the plausibility of alternative explanations, and remain open to changing your mind when presented with compelling evidence. In the case of the moon landings, the evidence overwhelmingly supports the conclusion that humans did indeed walk on the lunar surface between 1969 and 1972. This evidence includes physical samples, ongoing scientific experiments, independent verification by multiple countries, and thousands of hours of documented footage and communications. The alternative explanation that the entire program was an elaborate hoax requires us to believe in an unprecedented level of conspiracy involving hundreds of thousands of people across multiple decades and nations. When we apply Occam's razor, the principle that the simplest explanation is usually correct, the authentic moon landings emerge as far more plausible than any hoax scenario. This doesn't mean we should never question official narratives or that governments are incapable of deception. Healthy skepticism is important, but it should be based on evidence and logical reasoning, rather than suspicion alone. The moon landing conspiracy theory also illustrates how our understanding of science and technology shapes our ability to evaluate claims. People who understand the basic principles of physics, photography, and space travel are better equipped to evaluate the conspiracy theorists' claims. This highlights the importance of science education in creating an informed citizenry, capable of making rational decisions about complex issues. As we look to the future of space exploration, the lessons from the moon landing debate become even more relevant. Private companies like SpaceX are developing new capabilities for lunar missions, and multiple nations are planning their own moon programs. International cooperation in space exploration continues to grow with projects like the International Space Station, demonstrating what can be achieved when nations work together. Mars exploration is advancing rapidly, with rovers like Perseverance and Curiosity providing detailed information about the red planet. Plans for human missions to Mars are being developed, though they face even greater technical challenges than the moon landings did. The ability to distinguish between authentic scientific achievements and misinformation will be crucial as these new frontiers are explored. Understanding the moon landing conspiracy theory helps us develop the critical thinking tools needed to evaluate future extraordinary claims. It's also worth reflecting on what the Apollo program represents in human history. Regardless of the political motivations that drove it, the moon landings stand as one of humanity's greatest technological and exploratory achievements. They demonstrated that humans can work together to overcome seemingly impossible challenges through science, engineering, and determination. The famous Earthrise photograph, taken during Apollo 8, helped spark the modern environmental movement by showing our planet as a small, fragile oasis in the vastness of space. The scientific knowledge gained from Apollo missions continues to inform our understanding of the moon's formation, the early history of the solar system, and the possibilities for future space exploration. The technologies developed for Apollo have found countless applications that benefit life on Earth. Perhaps most importantly, Apollo expanded the boundaries of human possibility into Hasid, inspired generations of scientists, engineers, and explorers. Many of today's space leaders cite the moon landings as their inspiration for pursuing careers in science and technology. The legacy of Apollo continues in every robotic mission to Mars, every satellite that improves our weather forecasting, and every advancement in our understanding of the universe. So where does this leave us in evaluating the moon landing conspiracy theory? After examining the claims, analyzing the evidence, and considering the broader context, the conclusion is clear. Humans did walk on the moon between 1969 and 1972. The evidence supporting this conclusion is overwhelming and comes from multiple independent sources. The conspiracy theory, while psychologically appealing to some, is not supported by credible evidence and requires us to believe in implausible scenarios. This doesn't mean that everyone who believes in the conspiracy theory is foolish or ignorant. These beliefs often stem from understandable skepticism about authority, gaps in science, education, or exposure to convincing but misleading presentations. The key is to approach such claims with open-minded but critical evaluation, considering all available evidence rather than cherry-picking facts that support predetermined conclusions. As we continue to explore space and push the boundaries of human knowledge, the principles that help us evaluate the moon landing conspiracy theory will remain relevant. We must maintain healthy skepticism while remaining open to evidence. We must understand the difference between possible explanations and plausible ones. We must recognize that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And we must remember that the universe is far more amazing and inspiring than any conspiracy theory could ever be. The real story of humans walking on another world, seeing Earth from 240,000 miles away, and safely returning home is more remarkable than any fiction. It represents the best of human curiosity, ingenuity, and determination. The moon landing conspiracy theory, despite its persistence, cannot diminish the genuine achievement of the Apollo astronauts and the thousands of people who made their missions possible. Neil Armstrong's first step onto the lunar surface really was one giant leap for mankind. A moment when our species transcended the bounds of our home planet for the first time. That achievement stands as a testament to what humans can accomplish when we combine scientific knowledge, technological capability, and the courage to explore the unknown. As we face new challenges and explore new frontiers, the spirit of Apollo, the commitment to pushing beyond our limits in search of knowledge and understanding, remains as relevant today as it was over 50 years ago. The moon landings were real, they were extraordinary, and they changed our understanding of what it means to be human in a vast and wonderful universe. And that's a truth worth celebrating, defending, and building upon as we reach for Mars and far beyond. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of history's most persistent conspiracy theories. Remember to approach extraordinary claims with healthy skepticism, but always remain open to evidence and wonder. Until next time, keep looking up and keep questioning, but question with science, logic, and an appreciation for the amazing things humans can achieve. end